now there are all in all 16 or 17 religious communities in Lebanon, but the major ones really are four. On the Christian side, the Maronites. Among the Islamic groups, the major sects are the Sunnis and the Shias, who used to be evenly divided, but now the Shias have an edge over the Sunnis. And then there are the Druzes, an Islamic sect which came to have one of its main concentrations in the southern parts of Mount Lebanon. In 1943, elections were to be held in Lebanon to produce the first parliament for the period of independence. In preparation for these elections, there was a gentleman's agreement between the Muslim and Christian leaders in the country for the division of the major government positions. And there was also an agreement as to the composition of parliament. This agreement, which was never written, of which no document exists, is called the National Pact. In 1943, probably Christians and Muslims were equal in numbers in Lebanon. But in time, the Muslim sector of the population became the greater one. So there was a demographic change.
It was extraordinary, really, when you go in and you see this covenant, as it were, that had been bequeathed to Lebanon by the French. And you realized how fragile it was when you saw that it was based not on democratic principles, but on a feudal system, if you like. And what it didn't do, and the biggest flaw of all, was that it didn't take into account demographic changes. And it was clearly intended to maintain power in the hands of the Christian Maronites. They became, if they weren't when it was first introduced, the minority. This began to cause friction, and all it needed as the years went by was something to tip the balance. You think of a child with building blocks. He's putting one on top of the other, and it's a fragile, precarious structure he has. He puts one too many, down it goes. And what happened was that the Palestinians were driven out of Jordan by King Hussein. They made their new home, temporary they expected, in Lebanon, because this is where, from there, they could strike at Israel. That's what tipped the balance.
One saw that the Palestinians were deeply embedded in the social, political structure of that country, particularly in the south, and they really ran the show.
It had been building up for some time. There was a sense of lawlessness that was taking hold. It became quite dangerous to go out at night, even before there was any major fighting.
And I regret to say the Palestinians failed to understand that essentially they were guests in this country, and they lauded it and strutted around, and they had their own way through sheer armed might, and that finally tipped the Maronites against them, because for the Maronites, Lebanon's sovereignty was their guarantee to them as a community, as a minority in the area, of their continued existence. And the Palestinians and their alliances with the enemies of the Maronites, that finally tipped the balance.
Adoud is a 19-year-old right-wing militiaman. He's been training since the age of 13. He's never left his neighborhood in East Beirut.
يا حي مثل ما شايفه شقفة خشبة وشقفة حديدة وحي كبسة زر تكبس تروح على بني آدم. شو هي خرطوشة يا حي شو يا حي هيدي هي بتخليه ينتكل لبني آدم. هاي الشقفة اللي فوق هيدي بينتكل والروح بزور الأبدية. شو بدك تحارب. شغلة صارت عندي مثل كرعة المي. صارت شغلة الحرب. الله يسترني من كلمة أنا يعني شو بدك يعني ما في مجال. صرت بلقط البارودة مثل كأني عم بلقط لعبة يعني ما في مجال. يعني بقوص فيها مثل كأني عم باكل شحابة بونبون مثل كأني عم بسلي شي وحدة. عادي شي طبيعي يعني. كل واحد بده يفوت على منطقتي الشرقية. ما بعتقد انه بفوت صاغ سليم لانه ما بدي خزقه وبدي اكل له لحمه. من هدول انه كانوا يفكروا يفوتوا علينا. كان من فلسطيني، من املي، من شيعي، من اشتراكي، من درزي، من الى اخره، من حتى شو بدي خبرك يعني كردي مردي كلهم هدول ما محرم يفوتوهم. فوق هيدا وكله انا انسان عسكري وحرب وما حرب وكل هالشيء هيدا، بس بضلني انسان بآمن كتير، بآمن بربي وخاصة يعني بشفيعي مار الياس. يعني تصور لوين مثلا دقوا على صدري بقع صدري وهون داق الصليب.
There had been a siege around the refugee camp at Tal el Zaatar for several weeks. That is, the Christian Phalangists were besieging this Palestinian refugee camp. Then finally it drew to an end. The camp fell. The Phalangists allowed the civilians to leave the camp, but of course they took away all the men between the ages of about 15 and 70 to a fate that nobody ever knew what happened to them, although people saw bodies and people saw them being dragged around the areas of East Beirut behind cars. And I have many good friends who are journalists who saw these things happen. I just saw some of the bodies on the beach afterwards. The next day we went over to East Beirut. The Phalangists invited us to come over, and Bashir Gemayel, who was then, he had just taken over as the head of the Phalangist militia. Bashir Gemayel had this press conference. He said, "We are proud of what you are going to see in the refugee camp." And he said it again and again. We said, you know, to ourselves, this is crazy. This guy is absolutely off the wall. But of course, you know, we had the opportunity, they gave us the opportunity, they were proud of what they had done, so they took us and showed us what they had done. And it was just disgusting for me. I remember I walked in with Joe Alex Morris, and you saw these kind of bundles of rags that the civilians had left as they fled from the camp. And then suddenly you notice that some of the bundles were actually bodies that were just kind of bundled up. And then we saw bodies that had been left in the roadway, just like a dirt track, and had been driven over. There was a constant stream of cars coming in, Christians coming in from the neighborhood with a little piece of paper that was a license to loot that was given out by the militia. And they were just driving right over the bodies, and some of these bodies were kind of down to sandwich thickness, almost unrecognizable as human bodies. And went in, and I saw a pregnant woman whose belly had been slit open. I saw just old people lying in all terrible contortions with knife wounds and gun wounds, just heaped on top of each other, probably where they had fallen.
We, the Christian Phalange, rule this country.